Chag Sameach.
Sameach.
I thought yesterday was the most beautiful service. It was a smaller, more intimate service for the day before the Chag, and it was. But today is extra special because we have the early minyan folks together with are we the late minyan? I guess we're the too late minyan. We're all together today. So this is, I think, even more beautiful in that way. Thank you, Karen, for handing out our Torah that we're going to study today. So I'll preface this by saying that I hope that this is a fruitful conversation. We can all keep an open mind. And that maybe this is something you might want to bring to your Seders tonight. So that's why I want to make sure you guys all had a copy. So this first text, I titled this at the top. First, I'll say Consulting for Pharaoh. And I was thinking, imagining, Pharaoh hiring McKinsey or some consulting firm to ask for suggestions for what to do at different points in the story. And we actually have this sugya from the Talmud that shows Pharaoh doing exactly that, asking for advice about what to do. We see the Moses side of the story of the Exodus, but there's a Pharaoh side of how to strategize and keep the Israelites in Egypt. So this story is from the Talmud. It's in the imagination of the rabbis of what happened if Pharaoh consulted different figures from the Bible. So this is not a historical document. This is not from the Torah. Some of it's totally anachronistic, but it's a beautiful midrash. So I'd love if we could read this together, and then if you are all up for it, if we could take a few minutes to do some chavruta learning. We have the time, and I have some questions on the next page for us to do that. But let's read the original text together. Okay. Does someone want to read first? There are sort of three sections. So the first paragraph through the Balaam section, who's our first character. Does someone want to read that one? Thank you. I thought I saw. No? Okay. Thank you, Todd. So three people, and then the first one is Balaam, remembering who he is. You may remember the story with the donkey. Does anyone remember that story? Does anyone want to catch us up for that story? So he's a prophet who was, I put this also in the parentheses, was hired by King Balak to curse the Jews. And Balaam God was trying to stop him on the road. And there was, an angel from God comes, and his donkey sees the angel, but he doesn't see the angel, even though he's a prophet, and he strikes the donkey, and then the donkey speaks. So if you've heard the story of the talking donkey, that's this guy, Balaam. Okay, just to remind you. Todd, will you read the Balaam paragraph?
Balaam, the prophet who was hired by King Balak to curse the Jews, who advised Pharaoh to kill all sons born to the Jewish people, was punished by being killed in the war with Midian.
Thank you. So this first character, and again, this is an anachronism, he's from later on in the story of the Torah, so the fact Pharaoh couldn't have really consulted him, but it's a midrash. So pretend that Balaam advised Pharaoh to kill all the sons born to the Jewish people. What would his punishment have been? It was that he was killed in the war with Midian, which is in the Torah. And this is, I should have said, in this section of the Talmud, the context is imagining what punishments would be appropriate to which crimes. So it's a long section about different kinds of punishment. But the one who helps Pharaoh strategize and to kill the Jews, to do a better job killing the Jews, he is punished by being killed. The second, so that I think we can all understand. That one is, I don't think that's surprising. Job, the next, someone want to read these three lines about Job? Thank you.
Job, who was silent and neither advised nor protested, was punished by suffering, as detailed in an anonymous book in the Bible.
Thank you. So Job we know the story of Job. It's a one of the books in the Bible that is a story of incredible suffering to someone who, in that story, does not seem to deserve it, right? You're all familiar enough with that story. Okay, so Job in this midrash was silent, did not advise, even though Pharaoh asked, and did not protest in any way, was still punished by this great suffering that we know of elsewhere in our tradition. So that, I think that maybe there's more of a question as to whether that's an appropriate punishment. I think that one's a little bit less sort of like tit for tat, but that's how Job is punished. Yitro, this is that last longer paragraph, and I might interrupt you a little bit to explain, but does someone want to read Yitro? Thank you, Matt.
Moshe's father-in-law was taken from refuge after he flees from Egypt, who ran away as a sign of protest, merited that some of his children's children sat in the Sanhedrin in the chamber of hewn stone, as is stated.
That place, just to stop for a second, is the seat of the Sanhedrin. That's the chamber of the hewn stone. So keep going. Thank you.
As it is stated, and families of scribes who dwelt at Zidon, Kerethites, Shemithites, and Sukkothites, these were the Kenites who descended from Hamath, the father of the house of Rechab. And it is written, the children of the Kenites, Moshe's father-in-law. This teaches that the Kenites, descendants of Yitro, the father-in-law of Moshe, dwelt at Yavetz, referring to the place where the Jewish people go for advice. In other words, the chamber of hewn stone, the seat of the Sanhedrin, the council of sages in Jerusalem.
Thank you. Thank you. So that all to say that Yitro, a figure we are familiar with from the Exodus story, Moses' father-in-law, when he was asked by Pharaoh, again, in this imaginary story, when he was asked by Pharaoh to help strategize and kill the Jews, he ran away. And if you'll notice, it says he ran away as a sign of protest. That's the second and third line of that paragraph. But the ran away part is in bold. And that means it's literally in the text of the Talmud. The as a sign of protest is not in bold. And in this, at least in this editing, this publishing, which is from the Koren Steinsaltz on Sefaria, that if it's not bold, it means it's interpretation. It's some commentary. It's it's helping us to connect the pieces. So we can disagree much more easily with the part that's not bold because that's the editor helping us. So whether he just ran away in almost a negligent way, maybe just ran away from the scene, or whether he ran away in a meaningful, expressive way to show that he really disagreed with what Pharaoh was doing, we can pick one of those. Either of those would be a reasonable interpretation of the original text. Okay, so we have these three models. Now, if you turn the next page, I have a bunch of questions, which it's okay if you don't get to all of them today. Maybe you want to talk about them at the Seder tonight. The top questions are from Rabbi Ethan Tucker from Hadar. And the bottom questions I wrote for a little bit more of a spiritual self-reflection kind of questions. So, and I want to say that part of reading these questions and I think having a more meaningful conversation will be expanding, not just imagining what would you do if you were asked by Pharaoh, literally in the story, but thinking a little more broadly about how we define who is Pharaoh. What does Pharaoh represent? What could Pharaoh represent, even today, even into the future? Who or what could be Pharaoh? And how do we respond? How would we respond if asked for help from someone who's being oppressive, who's being an authoritarian in some ways, who's being whatever essence we might assign to Pharaoh? So how are we going to respond? Are we going to be, like those three figures? Are we going to be Balaam? Are we going to be silent like Job? Or are we going to run away or protest, depending on how you read the last model from Yitro? Okay, so that's how I'm hoping to make this, not just an interesting midrash, but also really relevant to the world today. So you already see all my cards. That's what I have. I know you guys will have a lot to bring to the table. I hope that we can take like 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes to please with whoever you brought today to shul, and then try to find someone you didn't come to shul with to also learn with today. These questions for the next few minutes, and then we'll come back together and I want to hear what you came up with. Okay, you can all do this. You like talking to each other. I know you do. Okay, let's come back together, please. Finish your sentence now. It's so tempting to I hope you keep talking over Kiddush, and like I said, bring this to your Seder if you want to, depending on who's there, right? Somebody already called me an instigator by choosing this text, which is, I can neither confirm nor deny, but I hope that if it fits into the culture of your family, that you continue this conversation at the Seder. So I know it's hard because we just want to keep talking. Does anyone want to, pick one of these questions. So this first question about distancing oneself from evil. How do you distance yourself from adjacent evil? And what does it mean for you? And I'll just say, if you say this is what it means for you, it doesn't mean it has to mean that for everyone. And we all know that, right? We all know we can have different views on something and still be in community and love each other. So, okay. Yes, what does it mean to be adjacent? How do you distance yourself from adjacent evil? Yes. Leslie.
Today's examples where people, when they're not able to persuade, then they're leaving, but they're speaking out in public and saying, I'm resigning because of, whatever, so that way people know what's going on. And I thought that
Got it.
if that was something that Yitro was able to do, then that would make him more heroic in my eyes than if he just ran away.
Yeah, so picking the version of the Yitro story where he not only ran away, but also in a way spoke out. And the people today who are running away or who are resigning or who are leaving something that they feel is oppressive or wrong, but they're not just leaving, they're also speaking out and explaining their choices. Is that about right? Okay. I'm trying to repeat it into the microphone also, in case we have live streamers. Yes. So thinking about what was the penalty in the moment, maybe Pharaoh would punish them. So this text from the Talmud is talking about God's punishment, and saying that the first two categories were punished. One was one was killed, one was caused great suffering in his lifetime, and Yitro was the one who was not punished. But what about in the moment? So what about if in this midrash where Pharaoh actually asks them for help, if you say no, are you going to be punished by Pharaoh? Repercussions, if we think today about people who are struggling with decisions like this, what is the repercussion in the moment? It's not only this divine reward and punishment in the future. Yeah.
Just to add to that, some of the people who are protesting right now, their lives are literally being threatened. Quite literally. Fauci and some others. They're being exposed to a level of hostility that literally threatens their lives.
So just a reminder that, some people who are protesting today are literally feel that their lives are at stake.
And their security has been taken away from a lot of people, including the former President Biden.
And their security has been taken away. I'm just repeating some of it to the microphone. When I was walking around, some of you told me some experiences of protesting. You don't have to share, but if you want to share an experience of feeling like you were Yitro recently, in some context, you're welcome to. Yes, Howard. One of our visitors, Howard, and Rosalie.
As I mentioned to the rabbi earlier, this so much reminds me of what's happening today in our country, unfortunately, just awful. However, last Saturday, Rosalie and I joined thousands of other Americans and citizens who protested what is going on. And she had the same sign that she had made 8 or 9 years ago in protest back then.
So, Howard and Rosalie, who are guests, we're so happy to have you for the holiday. Annual guests over Passover. We're sharing that they were in Florida recently protesting where they live, and the saddest part for them was that they were using signs that they made 8 years ago, and that they still were relevant, and that was very hard for them to feel like maybe they were Yitro 8 years ago, and why do we have to be Yitro again? It's been, we should think that, I don't know, the world has changed enough that we can recycle the old signs. Yes.
Well, more than the protests in Florida, which were significant, there were protests all over the country.
Right,
And
right.
that's very significant, with multiple signs saying all kinds of things, protesting what's going on today in this administration.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I'm trying to stay away from the politics of today. But going back to your question and even thinking of these advisors being called by Hitler, if we look at it that way, you have a more imagined a framework that really is more vivid.
Yes.
And I think that, well, in our discussion, first of all, we believe that, or we talked about, and I think there was sort of a consensus, I would hope I'm speaking to the group, that if you just run away, that is equivalent to remaining silent. And the worst thing that we as Jews, I think, can agree on is not to remain silent. We've learned our lesson. So if you would have, as Leslie pointed out, if Yitro first tried to convince Pharaoh what to do or against doing it, and he didn't listen, but then he ran away and publicly stated why he ran away, that would have
Yeah.
an effect.
A press release or something. No, but yeah.
For Job to do nothing, remain silent,
Yeah.
was not something that I think we felt was a virtue,
Yeah. Thank you.
because he remained silent when he could have spoken up, and he falls into that category.
Thank you.
As far as Balaam, I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, I just want to repeat it. So John said that it might be, thinking about how it applies today, I think is meaningful for many of us. But for some of us who don't want to talk about today, think back to the time of the Holocaust and the questions that came up around, I think you said Hitler asking people, asking for, commanding people, Nazi collaborators who felt like their lives were directly in danger, who, we're familiar with all these questions and all these stories, so I'm just reminding us. And what I also really liked your distinction between silence like Job and if Yitro really ran away quietly, that there isn't so much of a difference between the two, which I have to say I think is the reason why the editor said ran away in protest, because otherwise there's not a difference between Job and Yitro. So we need there to be a difference. Otherwise, why does he get a different result, a different punishment? Yeah, Toby.
I want to fork up, because there are ways of protesting without taking out an ad or making a sign, right? So there are ways, and I think in the Holocaust we've learned of many of those, right? And so both nothing was enough and everything was something, right?
Right.
So if you try to do something, there are ways to stay within the system, right? So in this instance, I can imagine somebody who is a counselor for Pharaoh who goes to, he says, I want to do X. And you say, okay, Pharaoh, let's talk about that. What's the goal? Right? And so now at a certain point, you probably have a line that says, when Pharaoh says, nope, I'm killing everybody, and you say, peace out, right? But up until that point, there may be ways to change his mind or to quietly off the side get everyone out who,
Right.
Is at risk. So there may be ways to be in between Balaam and Yitro in a way that is still laudable
Right. And not silent.
and not silent.
Yeah. So ways to be in the system.
Up a sign.
Not holding up a sign, but to be in the system, maybe working quietly to help make it better, to protect people, thinking about back to John's Holocaust example, the righteous Gentiles who had to work quietly They couldn't hold up a sign, but had to work quietly from within the system to try to make it better. Yeah. Matt. Oh, Marilyn. Mm-hmm. The Jews that took apart nuclear power. Yeah. Yeah. Matt? The Jews who took apart nuclear power from the inside. In Iran. Matt.
Picking up on what Toby said, I was focused in the discussion also on the something else. And I'm not couldn't be here and advocate for Bilam, but that's kind of what we're talking about is a different version of Bilam. And what I think on all of this is we're talking about people in these positions, but we're also talking about how we judge them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think, whatever you think about the current administration relative to the first round 8 years ago, there were people within the administration who seemed to be doing what Toby, was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And how did we judge them versus how we judge people in the current administration?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, cause us to rethink how we were judging people several years ago. Because
Right.
the question is it good or is it not as bad as it could be?
Yeah.
If it's not as bad as it could be, is that viewed as a positive or no, you're still part of the problem and therefore you should resign?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So thinking about how we judge, the people in these positions of advising, the authoritarian or advising Pharaoh, that sometimes we're praising them for being not as bad as they could be, and that's maybe fair, but also be aware of how it's all relative. Maybe I think you said it much better, but that's my summary for everyone. Okay, who hasn't spoken yet? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I brought this up in our discussion. I was thinking about Judgment at Nuremberg. It was played in a movie.
Judgment at Nuremberg.
At the end, when the Herr Yanning, the judge who was convicted, played by Burt Lancaster, calls Spencer Tracy in, and he was also a judge, and says, I want to give you all of the things that I wrote. I want you to know that I never thought it would come to this.
Mm-hmm.
And Spencer Tracy says, it came to this the first time you convicted somebody who you knew to be innocent. And in terms of cutting people slack and not judging, the fact is that what Spencer Tracy was saying was that you needed to have stood up then at the time, because then at the time, before things progressed to that point, other people who respected you might have stood up with you then,
Mm-hmm.
instead of giving an imprimatur of
Mm-hmm.
okayness to stuff that's going on, and then step by step by step by step, people take it to a place where they don't even recognize the line that's been crossed.
Yeah.
Sometimes we
Thank
have to
you.
judge more than we were judging, and to have called them to account to stand up for things.
Yeah. That's an interesting counterpoint. That standing up early, even when things aren't as bad as maybe they're going to get, I think you guys have an interesting conversation, can maybe help more, if we had perfect 2020, backwards vision. Yes.
I just want to say, before the Holocaust, Hitler had a meeting with the supreme head of the Arab nation. I don't remember his name, Abdullah what. And
Mufti.
they decided that the best way to deal with the Jews was to kill them all. For the Arabs to kill them and for Hitler to kill them. And this was in the early 30s.
So we have a Bilam. Yeah, we have an example of Bilam.
Significant.
Thank you. Karen.
I'm just kind of curious from the sort of long view that all of these three characters are mentioned in our history, and whoever is telling our story collectively gave a few sentences to the donkey story, gave a chapter to Yitro, right? There's a chapter of Yitro in the Torah, but Job has a whole book.
Right.
Right? So is that a cautionary tale
Huh.
for all of us to think about in terms of, are we going to act like the donkey, like Yitro or like Job, I think it gives us some room to think about actions and consequences.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Last words from the back row. Sorry.
This again made me think a lot about also the act of speech, like looking at the Hebrew words. Advise was silent, ran away. Bilam is the only one who speaks actively, and I think I'm also just echoing the sentiment that's been shared about wanting a fourth option.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like it's significant to me, like Bilam who speaks and he stays. Eov is silent, but he stays in the court. He continues to participate, and I think Yitro, it's like it's admirable that he removed himself because I don't want to be a part of it. And I
Right.
think there is an act of expression in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I want the fourth option of the person who leaves and articulates in a positive speech, not Bilam's negative speech.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that it's an interesting conversation with Toby's point earlier, and that running away is expressive. Yeah, thank you. So I wish we could hear from everyone, but I want to just have the chance to share with you the last page, and then we are going into Musaf because we have a special Musaf today. So the last page, so I'm not going to read all of them, but the first, again, if you want to take this to your Seder, the first quote is from Heschel, from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, about the role of prayer in ruining the pyramids of callousness, hatred, opportunism, and falsehood. And a question that we're not going to have time for today, but how could prayer do anything in this? What kind of, could prayer change us internally? Could prayer help us to get our voice? Could prayer help us to figure out what we can do against an authoritarian like a Pharaoh? And also the pyramids metaphor I wanted to give you. And also this is Rabbi Shai Held, who's also from Hadar. This is from his book, Judaism is About Love. And this is a beautiful framing of how can we become anti-Egypt. So I'll just read the bolded part at the bottom. We are summoned to create a radical alternative to Egypt, an anti-Egypt, if you will, a society in which the weak and defenseless are protected rather than exploited, loved rather than demeaned. And so I hope for all of us, as we're thinking about responding to the whatever Pharaoh represents, that we also work inwardly in our prayer and in our spiritual life, and also outwardly in our work in the world to become anti-Egypt. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Baruch Tiyeh.